let's talk about values and beliefs. First off, what's the difference between values and beliefs?
Okay, so like a technical definition is a value is like a concept that we hold to be true about our external or internal world. Sorry, a belief. Did I say belief or value? A belief. A belief is a concept that you hold to be true about the external world, or or yourself. So I believe that I am not good enough, or I believe that that I can do this. I believe I am the best salesperson in the city. Whatever. That's a belief about the self, or I believe the market is not good right now. That's a belief about the external world. A value is it's quite specific. A value, on the other hand, is a nominalization, which means that it's an abstract concept, a kind of a process that we've turned into a noun. That means that a value is like an abstract thing that we hold to be important. So, for example, freedom is a value. It's a value a lot of entrepreneurs have. Everyone who's read the 4-Hour Workweek wants to achieve some sort of freedom, and they're motivated toward that. So freedom is actually just the process of being free. There's nothing, you can't put freedom in a wheelbarrow, you can't attain it, you can't hold it, you can't grind it up and put it in your pocket. But it's an abstract noun. It's something that we're motivated towards. We treat it as if it's real and attainable, but actually it's not. It's kind of intangible, but highly motivating. So that's really what defines the value is. It's something that we're driven towards as an entrepreneur. And some people have values, I should mention, that they're actually driven away from. So some people will say, and I see this a lot with entrepreneurs, that they're driven towards money, that money is a value. They just want to achieve huge financial goals. But actually, a little bit of digging will kind of reveal that they're more driven by a desire to avoid poverty, rather than they are driven towards an abundance of wealth or financial wealth. So sometimes values can kind of catch people coming and going and be a little bit different, in that they're more about what we're motivated away from rather than what we're driven toward.
Okay, so how then do our values and beliefs affect our psychology and our success? Just to use that example there about being driven away from poverty, rather than forward towards wealth. How would a value like that impact us compared to having maybe the positive version, which is towards wealth?
Yeah, so the wealth value thing is a great example. It's one that I talk with clients a lot about that concept. If you've got a strong what I call an away from value, so you're strongly driven away from poverty, then you can basically track your motivation. If you had a motivation graph, I guess, that's going to look like a wave pattern. Because as you perform in your business and produce cash, you go out and make money and you start paying yourself, you're going to find that all of those poverty concerns, like bills to pay, whatever it might be on your mind, keeping a roof over your head, all that sort of stuff, all of those concerns start to evaporate as you produce cash. So the cash flow of your business goes up, and then once you get to a certain point, you've actually avoided poverty. Because there's a line there, isn't there? There's no longer any danger of poverty. So for those people who are 100% driven, their value is truly 100% away from poverty, at that point they're going to stop working because their value has been fulfilled. So there's no more motivational leverage there for them to continue performing. So that's where that wave pattern comes in, because as soon as they stop working, the business's cash flow is going to start dropping. Obviously it depends on the size of the business how much of an impact one person's values would have, but certainly for a small business where the entrepreneur is responsible for that cash flow, it's going to have a huge impact. So once that poverty value is fulfilled, they stop working, they chill out, they get complacent because they feel like they've avoided poverty, and then of course poverty catches up with them again because they stop producing money. So they produce this kind of pattern. Once they get down, they start feeling the pressure and they're squeezed a little bit, that motivation kicks in because their value isn't fulfilled, and they have to avoid poverty again. And so this repeats in a cycle, sometimes for years. Now the difference is, if you take a look at somebody like Richard Branson, who's obviously this amazing example of entrepreneurial brilliance, here is a guy who's not at all motivated by avoiding poverty. He's entirely driven by he's driven by lots of values, but to do with money, he's driven by attaining kind of abundance and wealth. Like, why would you wake up in the morning in a hammock on a tropical island and think, what am I going to do today? And ask yourself, I could sit here and I could do some yoga and go to the beach, or I could start up a new mobile phone company to add in the mix with my airline and my music business. So that's not the thinking of somebody who wants to avoid poverty. he's kind of pursuing greater and greater levels of success because he wants to attain something more than that.
Okay, so I understand that. What would be another example of a value or a belief that you hear quite often coming up in regard to an entrepreneur and their success?
Sorry, the question again?
The question again is, I mean, you mentioned wealth and going away from poverty or towards wealth as an example of a value.
Yeah.
What would be another common value or a common belief that comes up regularly for you when you're talking to entrepreneurs as maybe a sticking point or something that they need to work through?
Look, I think the other big one, and this tends to kick in after those financial kind of values are a little bit fulfilled. Once entrepreneurs have got that cash flow reasonably nailed and they've kind of operating okay, there is the idea of freedom, which is very similar to to wealth, because certainly money buys a lot of freedom. But it's something that a lot of business owners are really driven by, especially those, I've noticed it a lot in those business owners who have created really fantastic jobs for themselves, where they've got brilliant companies and they're kicking ass, they're doing good, but they're having to put in sort of 60, 70 hours a week to keep the cogs turning in that machine. And so the conversations that I have with those kinds of people are generally focused on fulfilling that value of freedom. So how can they figure out ways to be able to step away from that business, work smarter, not harder, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, so as a value, freedom is really significant to a lot of entrepreneurs, especially those people who also want to up their game, not necessarily so they can be free to go sit on a tropical island, which is fun for a little while, but the people who have nailed the science of achievement, they've done it with one business, they'd like to be able to get the freedom to be able to step away and maybe repeat that formula in another vertical or do something different, but they just don't know how. So yeah, so that value is very motivating for a lot of entrepreneurs.
Okay. Fear is something you write about quite a bit, and you mentioned it earlier. You've got a whole book on it.
Yeah.
What does fear have to do with being an entrepreneur or running a startup?
Well, I think fear is I put together this book called Demystify Your Fear, and the tagline for that book was how to overcome the last obstacle to entrepreneurial success. I think that it took me a while to come up with that sentence, but I really do think it's significant, because fear is there with any obstacle. It's there at any plateau in any entrepreneur's career, at any point where a business is kind of stagnating. There's always a fear of taking the actions that are going to help transcend whatever problem that is and take things to the next level. So I've worked with people, entrepreneurs and salespeople within businesses who have been operating at a level but haven't quite managed to start playing with the real big boys. They haven't quite managed to figure out how to engage those really big clients that are going to make a huge difference for their business. And the only thing that's holding them back from that is fear of chatting with those people. I've worked with, I've met kind of newbie entrepreneurs who are just wanting to start out, but they never really take the actions that are going to make a big difference and get their business rolling or get their startup rolling and cash flow positive, because they're afraid of what it might mean deep down if they actually did that. So there's a huge amount of self-sabotage that happens because people are afraid of the consequences of success. There's fear of failure and fear of success, and I think fear of success is a little bit more insidious. A lot more people are aware consciously of their fear of failure. That's a big one. But some people are afraid of what might happen if they really are as successful as they want to be. So fear is a huge issue. I think it's there. I think every entrepreneur has to conquer, and overcome fear to achieve the goals that they want with their business at some point.
What are the successful traits in entrepreneurs, the psychological traits that you see as being those that really contribute to an entrepreneur's success?
There's a couple, and I've sort of made it my business to look for examples of excellence among entrepreneurs, and try and look for and meet those people who have achieved really phenomenal success and figure out what it is that they do differently at a psychological level, or perhaps with their time. And so that we can model that, and so that that's something that I personally can benefit from, but also teach back to a lot of my clients. And probably there's a lot of different things, but the one that I would guess has the biggest impact really comes down to time management. It's the way that people who are very successful, who are running huge businesses, corporate empires, or amazing entrepreneurial startups that give them loads of free time and cash flow and all that wonderful stuff. Those people tend to spend an enormous amount of time doing work that I would call important, significant work that isn't influenced by urgency. So the strange thing happens when somebody starts a business. They write a business plan, they have all of these kind of projects, these amazing idealistic goals of what they would like to achieve, but once the reality of running that business sets in, every entrepreneur finds themselves with a to-do list of totally urgent things that have to happen, that bills that have to be paid, staff, paying your staff kind of issues, HR concerns. There's all of the stuff that pops up that you have to look after that's utterly urgent, has to be done. These problems have to be solved, but a lot of that distracts entrepreneurs from doing the work that counts. And that could be developing the new product, or figuring out how to enter a new vertical market, or building the second business, or whatever that might be. So what I've observed among people who I would call real rock star performers in the world of business is that they somehow find time to do that stuff. They spend more time working on work that counts, on important stuff, without any urgency distracting them. And because of that work that they put into these areas that they're passionate about, they produce incredible business results and somehow figure out a way to handle all of those day-to-day kind of urgency concerns. And again, going back to the Richard Branson example, there's a guy who's figured it out. He runs his business from a hammock on the phone. I don't even know if I'm not sure if he spends that much time on email, but you can imagine when you're just focusing full time on coming up with brilliant ideas and figuring out how to action them to get into new businesses, into new markets, you're obviously going to be much more successful than someone who's overloaded with the day-to-day running of even a small corporate business. So that's what it's all about, doing work that counts and finding the time to prioritize it.